Det en glede å ønske velkommen til Asialink TV. Her får du rapporter om hva vi opplever av det Gud gjør i Asia. Og det ganske spennende. Du kan lese om oss på våre websider asialink.no, og du kan også få bladet vårt, så vi anbefaler deg å skaffe det selvfølgelig. I studio i dag så har jeg med meg en gjest som heter Eugene Bach, og i et tidligere program så har han fortalt sitt vittnesbyrd som du helt sikkert kan finne på våre websider, eller om du googler der rundt omkring og finner frem av det. Han jobber i en organisasjon som heter Back to Jerusalem, eller tilbake til Jerusalem. Og en del av det arbeidet, der drar han med seg ting fra sin oppvekst og sin trening i militæret, det han har lært der. Og i dag vil du se hvordan mye av dette passer så godt sammen, og hvordan Gud gjør ting i vårt liv på et tidspunkt som vi tenker at ja, det var den fasen i livet, men så ser vi at han bruker det på en annen fase i livet. Så med det så skal du få høre litt av historien om hva Eugene står i nå, og Back to Jerusalem, den bevegelsen, men også hva dette arbeidet med kinesiske misjonærer, hva det leder til i andre land også. So Eugene, welcome back. We're happy to have you here. This is a privilege. In a previous program, we've talked about your testimony. You shared that, and you shared your military background, how that has been essential and useful in so many ways when we look at your missions work today. Back to Jerusalem. Previously, we traveled together in China, and we have been ministering there. But there has been a change. Maybe you can start there to explain what is this change from ministering inside China to now working with Back to Jerusalem, which is mostly outside China? Give a little background of that before you go into some of the more specifics of how the training has become essential.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to thank you so much. It's been great being here with you and sharing with you some of the things that I feel is exciting about living in our day and age. I mean, it really is. What we're seeing inside of China is one of the most amazing stories that is not really being told on the news. Think about this. About 100 years ago, which is not that long ago, the older we get, the shorter that time seems, right? So 1924, more than 90% of the world's Christian body lived primarily in Western Europe and the Americas. Today, more than 60% of the world's Christian body, only 100 years later, which is not that long ago, more than 60% now live in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. That's a massive demographic change.
And South America.
In South America. Well, I said for the Americas. So even in 1924, you had a lot of the Christians that lived in the Americas. That's why it's a plural, both North and South. But now today, you see that so many Christians. That change is a massive shift. How did that happen? Well, we have been seeing revival take place for a while inside of China, and out of that revival has come this vision that they call Back to Jerusalem. The Back to Jerusalem vision is basically the Great Commission. It finds its foundations in Matthew 24:14. So when the disciples went to Jesus and they asked Jesus, when will all these things come to pass? You're talking about the end times, you're talking about your return, all of these things that you're discussing, when will they happen? And Jesus says very clearly that you're going to hear about wars and rumors of wars. There'll be earthquakes in various places, but that's not the end. That's only the signs of the end. And then he gets the most specific. One verse covers it all. When will he return? Matthew 24:14, he says, when this gospel of the kingdom is preached to all the nations, all the ethnos groups, then the end will come. Well, if we're looking at preaching the gospel to every ethnos group, all of the people groups that have never heard the gospel even one time, more than 90% of them live between China and Jerusalem in this area. Some people call it the 1040 window. Some people call it the Indian Arc, which is probably the most descriptive because there you go from Indonesia and you follow the arc of the Indian Ocean all the way down to the eastern seaboard of Africa. But we call it the land between the walls, between the Great Wall of China and the Western Wall of Jerusalem. This is the final frontier of missions. This is where the gospel hasn't been preached. And here is where we see the Chinese revivals are producing individuals that are coming out of the flames of these revivals and saying, God has called me to take the gospel to the nations between China and Jerusalem. It doesn't mean that the Chinese are going to leave China and just fly directly to Jerusalem, but they're going to go from China to all of the nations between China and Jerusalem, from country to country, village to village, person to person, preaching the good news. So the Back to Jerusalem vision is that Great Commission vision of taking the gospel from China all the way back to Jerusalem, completing a cycle of what we believe started in Acts 1, preaching in Jerusalem and then going around the world to the ends of the earth. If you're a circle, the ends of the earth, your finish line is your starting point. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, very much. I'm thinking there's people here watching the program who lived during the Cultural Revolution in China. And there was very few Christians after that because that was ruthless and brutal, systematic persecution of the Christians.
Yeah.
How is the situation in China now? Of course, nobody can count.
Yeah.
But your estimates are pretty good because you actually get reports of numbers. At least you did for a while. I don't know it recently, but you did for a while. What is your thinking? There has been a massive revival in China.
Yeah.
And people barely don't know it.
Yeah, that's really good. I wrote a book called China and End Time Prophecy because a lot of people that question the numbers, because there's always going to be questions of numbers. We don't even know get this. China is arguably, like most people that go to Shanghai, they may say, there was a very famous Hollywood star from America that traveled to Shanghai and said, I've been to Shanghai and I've seen the future, right? Because everything that she saw, this well-known person, seemed to be more advanced than other countries that she had been to. And so this is one of the more advanced nations in the world in some aspects. There's extremely poor areas. Yep. It's very difficult to talk about China in a monolith. So everything that I say can be challenged because Western China is as different from Eastern China as England is from Russia in culture, language, history, as Norway is from Italy. The languages are different. The people are different. They look different. They speak different. They have different backgrounds, different histories. So anything that I say can be challenged. But the way that we did it is when we look at China, as a whole today, we don't even know the population. So it's hard with all of the gadgets that we have, all of the electronics that we have, all of the big developments that we have, to even get the population of China correctly. Why? Because people are born every day without birth certificates in China, especially under the one-child policy. A lot of the births were hidden. Oh, yeah. So we don't know. People say anywhere between 1.3 to 1.6 billion people. That difference of what they don't know is bigger than the entire United States population. So, I mean, we don't even know the population numbers. But when we look at the number of Christians, as you pointed out, there were very few Christians that we knew of coming out of the Cultural Revolution. We do know how many were before the Cultural Revolution. And if we just use government data for the late 90s, early 2000s, we see that there's a big jump by millions. So we don't even have 1 million Christians prior to the revolution. And China is now admitting to at least 70 to 100 million Christians inside of China. How did we get there?
That's the government.
That's the government. The government documents that I can point to and give reference to will show that they have admitted to at least that many. We believe it to be around 150 to 170 million believers. But the way that we get those numbers is we look at the church growth in different areas and talk to the leaders. But the important thing is that even by the government's own admission, we've seen the largest revival of any country in the world with at least 30,000 people coming to Christ every single day just from those numbers. But here's the amazing thing. As you pointed out, they went through a very difficult time since the Cultural Revolution. So the Cultural Revolution in 1949 that took place, one of the major focuses for Mao Zedong was to eradicate Christianity. It was the opiate of the masses. This Christian religion needed to be done with. And after all of the journalists were kicked out and the death of Mao Zedong took place, many people began to trickle back in, and the journalists came along with them. Mao Zedong's wife was known for having an interview together with the journalists, and they asked, "What's the situation for Christians today inside of China?" And she said, "If you go to our local museum, you will find a Bible there in the Chinese language. That is the only evidence that Christianity had ever existed in China. But today, Mao Zedong is dead, and Christianity is very much alive. That Bible is not the only evidence. Now we have more Christians in China than most countries in the world."
Would you consider China reached in a sense?
I would not, and this is why. Even though we have so many believers, if you look at let's say 30,000, when I say 30,000 people come to Christ every single day inside of China, people almost gasp. That's a big number, right? There's more people dying. There's more people being born inside of China. Also, that's only a drop in the bucket of their overall population. What we have seen in the last decade is a major shift in China because the revivals that I'm talking about have mainly taken place east of the Yellow River. Now we are seeing a major push for Western China, which is bigger geographically than Eastern China.
But less populated.
And less populated, yes. But larger landmass area and much more diverse. And we say less populated, but it's only less populated in comparison to Eastern China because there you have the density of the population is so high. But in Western China, that's where you have two major strongholds. The Northwest China is mainly Islam. Southwest China is mainly Buddhist. Both of those areas hold on with an iron grip to their religious sector. And
even though they're persecuted by the government. I mean, Xinjiang province and the Tibetan area, which represents roughly those areas.
Yes. The persecution, you have to understand, though, the persecution in those areas come a little bit because of those that want to separate. So you have separatist movements.
Yes.
And that comes with military kind of ambitions as well, which in the Christian sense, you don't have that. You don't have this militaristic rise against the government. In fact, the hardest thing for me to get used to when I first moved there, because, I was Americanized. I come from the American military.
Western.
Western, yes. Yeah. So I came from a Western background. And so when I'm sitting with the Chinese for the very first time, and I'm hearing them pray for their leaders, not raising a rebellion against their leaders, praying for those that persecuted them, praying for those that want them to be eradicated from the nation. And I'm asking myself, and them, I did ask them as well, why are you praying for your leaders? That seemed to be backwards to me. I mean, for me, I felt that if they're persecuting you, at least resist. Go to Beijing and do a protest. Do something like arm yourselves and fight, have a resistance against the government. At the very least, my brothers and sisters, write an angry Facebook post, like something, do something. But they didn't. They prayed for their leaders. They supported their leaders, even during persecution. Whereas it's a different situation in Western China with the Muslims and the Tibetans. And in fact, I would say that the government actually protects the Muslims against Christians and protects Buddhists against Christians.
That is my kind of lead over to the situation, because bringing the gospel to these people who are least reached in the world is a very, very challenging part. As you say, the government is protecting them from Christians. And we see that reaching these groups today, not only in China, but also in the Back to Jerusalem movement, is very challenging. And that is part of the vision that the Chinese have. They believe they have been prepared for this in a particular way.
Yeah.
But your training and your military background, coming back to that also plays into the picture, because you have implemented some of the military training actually in preparing these missionaries for going outside, which is not the common theology training and biblical training, but Give us a glimpse. We have a little bit shorter of time.
It's based on what I call the forgotten promise.
Right.
So in the Bible, we as Christians, we often cling to all of these different promises, right? We believe that that we have victory over the enemy because we've been promised that. We believe that by his stripes we are healed, so we can claim our healing through his promise. We believe in salvation because of his death on a cross. Those promises of God we cling to, we amplify, we preach about, we get excited about. But there's a forgotten promise. It's the promise that Jesus made to his disciples. He promised them. He said, if the world hated me, they will also hate you. A student is not greater than his teacher. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you. So that is a promise. And so when we work together with the Chinese, one of the things that we felt is needed is the ability to be tortured, the ability to go through interrogation. So I've had that in my background. I've gone through a type of simulated torture, you can say. And I've also gone through different types of interrogation techniques. So you'll know about this because we had a special Back to Jerusalem training school where we bring the Back to Jerusalem missionaries through that school. And because of my background, I've been able to work together with other individuals to implement this as a part of the training for the Chinese. But they don't know that it's coming, right? So when the Chinese go to the school, they don't get a syllabus that says, you're going to be going through interrogation.
Interrogation day.
Yes, interrogation day. So it's a surprise for them. That's what makes it so effective. Yeah. And so what I do is I work with a couple of local people. We go in, we get the Chinese out of their bed late at night. They've actually gone through a couple of days of sleep deprivation and food deprivation without really knowing about it. And then from there, they go through interrogation. And it's done as something that is legal. So individuals who are working as police officers ask them very simple questions, start off friendly, and then we gently start increasing the pressure as the time goes on. And I coach the interrogators how to do the interrogation. And there's not many Bible schools that I know of that implement interrogation into their, everyday operations.
Isn't this a little bit extreme? Isn't it?
Well, here's the thing. A lot of Chinese have never been out of China before.
Correct.
So just going up to an immigration desk and being asked basic questions from the very beginning makes them nervous. And we're not teaching them to lie. The number one thing that I was taught in military interrogation 101 is that you don't lie. Why? Because when you are being tortured, when you are sleep deprived, when you are scared, when you are out of your wits, when you're drugged, you are not able to maintain a constant storyline if it's a lie. But if it's based on truth, you can continue on without giving away too much information. I taught them the same thing. So that military transfer of knowledge helps just with basic going into an immigration desk, maybe taken to secondary immigration, question more. This helps them in very basic situations where they're arrested. Brother Yun, one of the most well-known Christians in China, he talks about being arrested, being questioned, being interrogated. We just try to prepare those students for what they will encounter. They've been promised persecution. They will see persecution. And so we're just preparing them for that.
So they have a special background from coming out of revival. They get a special training to prepare them for their most difficult task, which is reaching the least reached people groups in the world.
Yeah.
Are they seeing any progress? That's the big question now.
Yeah.
Are you seeing any progress? Do they actually have some grade of success? I mean, I don't expect them to be always successful. They will have exactly the same challenges that any Western missionary will have. Yeah. But what do you see? Is there any benefit of working with this?
Yeah. What I have seen, the biggest benefit is nothing that I bring to the table. To be honest, I just love being there. I love being with the Chinese. I will serve in any way that they want. I tell them, hey guys, I will be your dedicated broom closet keeper. If you just let me be a part of what you guys are doing right now. So I serve the Chinese, but I can't say that anything that I provide to the Chinese really helps them in the long run. What I have seen is the experience that God has given them, where they grew up where they first received Christ, that persecution under the communist regime, the CCP of Beijing, that experience goes with them as they go into Western China. And in Western China, we are seeing that play out in a really unique way. We are seeing the church grow in ways that we never thought possible. And I can't give you numbers, but I can tell you this. We continue to train new leaders. And there's one thing that I always look for. I've been doing this for 25 years. I've been living in China for 25 years. And the one thing that I've noticed throughout doing my study on revivals, and I've studied around the world and the history of revivals, the one constant that you often see is the revival of young people. And so when I'm in China and I'm sitting in a room with leaders, I'm not seeing the same leaders every single time I go to Western China and I speak or I teach or I do a report or I provide support. I'm seeing new leaders because the number of leaders is breaking its neck to keep up with the number of new believers. That has been the main significant marker, if you will, of being able to tell, are they having an impact? And the answer, in short, is yes, they are.
We are on the final stretch. I just want to give us a little teaser at the end because we've now stayed inside China. Are they having any success outside of China? Are they influencing movements in Cambodia, Laos, Iran, Middle East? Do you see also efficiency there, that they are actually making a difference?
Yeah. I spend most of my time these days working with the Chinese outside of China, in North Korea, Iran, Sudan, Somalia, places where the gospel is blocked.
These are difficult nations to work
They're
in.
very difficult.
Yeah.
And what I'm talking about is not an outsourcing of the gospel, and that's very important. We're not talking about outsourcing the hard part of the gospel to cheap labor somewhere else. But this is a nation that's rising up, joining together with the world's Christian body, standing shoulder to shoulder with you and I in the trenches of frontline spiritual warfare. And that is exciting.
That is a key thing because it seems like the combination of Western Christianity and churches with their resources and the Asian churches, China maybe in particular, but also the others. We're not going to be speaking down on the work that's done from Korea or India or any of the other good, strong mission nations. But we see that this combination is very effective and has the ability to break through also in those most difficult countries. Would you say that?
I think that's the perfect way to look at it, that each area actually has their strength within the body. It's very easy to see how the Chinese underground house church is doing things and say, oh, that's wrong and that is right. Or look at the Western church and say, oh, look how we have deteriorated over the years. We're good for nothing. We need to look at the Chinese and adopt that. We don't look the same when we're born. And I would argue that perhaps we don't look the same when we're born again, that God has given us certain capabilities and resources in our life for a purpose, not to replace, but to complement his message in the end days.
Thank you, my friend. Very enlightening. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Da har vi kommet til veis ende, et program som vi kunne ha fortsatt med, for du skjønner at her sitter det en mann som har stor kunnskap om det som foregår i Kina og tilbake til Jerusalem. Jeg håper det har gitt deg nok informasjon til at du kjenner at dette ønsker jeg å bli mer kjent med, og da har vi Asia Link i Norge som jobber sammen med disse vennene, der du kan lese om oss både i bladet vårt og på våre websider, og du kan se oss på Asia Link TV. Vi håper du fortsetter å følge oss i mange og nye spennende programmer fra hele Asia. Takk for at du har fulgt oss i kveld. Gud velsigne deg, og takk for i dag. Herren med deg.